Hello and welcome to episode 6 of On the Trail with Miles and James Dean. In today's episode, we will enter West Virginia at Harpers Ferry. Just a little recap for those who are just tuning in to the channel for the first time. These episodes of On the Trail detail my over 5,000 mile 6-month horseback ride across the United States, beginning in New York City and ending in Los Angeles, California. The journey began on September 22nd, 2007 and ended on April 1st, 2008. The journey had two themes. One, the challenges of reliving what it may have been like in the bygone era of riding on horseback across the United States, an era that had disappeared over 80 years before. And second, telling a story about the contributions of my ancestors to the exploration, development, and expansion of the United States during the time when the horse was the major mode of transportation. A rich history which, in my 35 years of classroom exposure, that is, 13 years as an elementary and high school student and 22 years as an elementary and high school teacher, was not being told, and I wanted to tell as much of the story as best I could from the trail. To do that, I visited and depended on the several Black scholars and intellectuals of the day. Thus far in my journey, I visited universities in Pennsylvania, Maryland, and Washington, D.C., historically Black institutions founded between the years of 1837 and 1867. My reasoning for visiting Harpers Ferry, West Virginia, was to visit the site of another historical Black institution called Storer College, founded in 1867, and it was there that the 1906 meeting place was held for the Niagara Movement, which later became the NAACP, and headed by W.E.B. Du Bois. But prior to that, it was the site of white abolitionist John Brown's last raid. Here you see photos from Harpers Ferry and the museum, the African American Museum that was there. There you see the town, or part of the town of Harpers Ferry, and there a picture of John Brown. Myself in Who's Who. John Brown was one of many white abolitionists of his day, but who had the distinction of holding a very strong conviction that the only way to abolish slavery was violently eradicating it, and led many raids on plantations to liberate men and women from enslavement. Also, in the accompaniment of John Brown at the raid of the U.S. Army Arsenal at Harpers Ferry in 1859 was with the intent to capture it and its weapons were his sons and 5 Black men who were all captured and killed. John Brown was accused of treason, among other things, and eventually hanged. The speech he gave at his trial was said to be equaled only by the Gettysburg Address delivered by Abraham Lincoln. As a side note, a one-time bodyguard for W.E.B. Du Bois was Al Lewis, who some of you would know from the 1964 sitcom The Munsters, which Al Lewis played a character of Grandpa. Unbeknownst to many, he was a radical activist in the civil rights movement and attended protest marches and demonstrations protesting the incarceration of Black Panthers. He reportedly also was a teacher of Black history to the Black Panther Party. Now, visiting John Brown's final resting place of resistance, where it was said by Frederick Douglass to be the place where the end of slavery began, was important to the mission that I was on. While the town of Harpers Ferry is both the easternmost and lowest point in West Virginia, only 247 feet above sea level, traveling out from that point and heading west to enter the Blue Ridge mountain range was a different animal altogether. What I didn't factor into the planning of the route was that the grading of the hills I intended to ride on and that Joyce would need to drive on was close to having a 5% or greater incline. Just to give you a perspective on the range of difficulty, let me show you this graph. If you look at the chart with the varying degrees of or grades or slopes, you can see that any degree above 5 degrees is considered a big hill. Joyce started to climb into the Blue Ridge Mountains, towing our 35-foot, 3-horse trailer, fully loaded with living quarters, 2,000 pounds of horses, 500 pounds of hay, 400 pounds of grain, 10 bags of shaving, a 50-gallon water tank, and it all topped out at slightly over 10,000 pounds. 12 miles outside of Harpers Ferry, and we knew it was over. The Dodge Dually was having no part of it, and the temperature gauge began to rise before reaching the halfway point of the first climb. The plan was to head west on Route 340 and connect to Route 50, and then ride Route 50 across to Clarksburg before turning south to ride to Charleston. It was already past 5, and I had no choice but to load up and drive to the nearest campground, which was just south of Romney, West Virginia. In the campground, I met a man by the name of R. Gale Stewart, a.k.a. Colonel Sherman Potter, who said that what I had just come across was only the first of several mountain ranges I would need to cross to get to Clarksburg, and if the first range beat me up like it did, then I was no match for the next series of ranges, which were higher. And he suggested that I go down south into the Shenandoah Valley, where I would cross mountain ranges that were not as steep. And eventually, I would come up out of the valley near Lewisburg, which was just east of Charleston. So that night, Joyce and I made preparations, readjusted our route, and the next morning, I rode Sankofa into Petersburg, where we camped for the night. Well, here we are, moseying on up River Road, headed out to 202. A little bit of a incline, but Sankofa is handling it pretty well. The next morning, I decided to continue the ride using Blaze, my second horse. I got an early start on Route 202 and had only ridden about 200 yards when Blaze suddenly spun himself around and headed back in the direction we had just come. The shocking part was that he didn't spin to his right and away from the traffic that was on our left, but that he spun left and into the traffic inches away from the cars traveling on the road. How the line of cars avoided hitting us, it was unimaginable. But what you can imagine is that I had no desire, and it was not the time to reprimand him or urge him to turn back around. Trying to discipline him in those traffic conditions was unthinkable. So, I allowed him to continue in the direction he wanted to go, which was back toward the trailer. The incident was so nerve-wracking and so dangerous that once I calmed my nerves, I called Jim, a good friend in the Hartford, Connecticut area, and asked him if he would come and get Blaze, because I had had enough. Blaze wouldn't walk fast enough for me, wouldn't lope for me, and now putting me in harm's way. My mind was made up, and I was going to look for another horse to take his place. I did tell Jim where I was and where I was heading. And before hanging up, he said that, well, what any responsible husband would say, which was that he would check with his wife and get back to me. I began to ponder what to do, and eventually decided to give Blaze what he wanted. I don't know if he wanted to be with Sankofa or just to be back in the trailer. So I gave him both options. However, I moved his options ahead of him instead of behind him. I asked Joyce to drive approximately 100 yards or so in front of Blaze and myself so that the trailer and Sankofa, if his head were sticking out, were still in his eyesight. And just as we approached the trailer to move out and drive the same distance ahead of us, after several of these tactics, Blaze got it into his mind. What he wanted was ahead of him and not behind him. And that solved the problem of him spinning around. Well, within an hour, I lost my cellular connection in that valley, and that lasted for several days. I was now away from the city and going deeper into the valley where the traffic was limited to an occasional passing car, allowing me to become more comfortable riding on Blaze, and amazingly, he became more comfortable as well.
Well, we're still on Road 600, that's Route 600, heading south, and there's a truck and trail up ahead of me. There's a dam over beyond that building, just below that mountain. I'm headed, and there's a beautiful lake over there on my left, and I'm on Blaze again. There's the road up ahead.
On or about the third day of riding him down through the valley of mountains and river streams and country smells and sounds, he became one with nature, and everything about him changed. He was now walking at a quicker pace and even loping just as smooth and carefree as he wanted to be. He had totally relaxed and became a horse that was a pleasure to ride. I spent the days riding through the valley with one hand holding the reins and the other hand in the air. No, I wasn't blocking the sun. I was waving. I had never waved in any state I rode through as much as I waved at people in West Virginia. I was riding on Route 84 at times, and this route kept crisscrossing through West Virginia and then into Virginia and then back into West Virginia and then back into Virginia. It was remarkable, amazing, beautiful. In Mill Gap, Virginia, we were invited to stay in the home of Miss Blanchard, who lived on a farm and had acres of land to turn the horses out for the night. When I was able to keep the horses outside for the night, they were limited to the size of the portable corral. Let me show you a picture of that portable corral. There you see, it was spacious enough for the horses to stretch their legs. So, to have a few acres of open space to run around for the night was such a delight for the horses that in the morning, would they come when I called for them was the question. And they didn't. They were having fun. So I had to use the old tactic of shaking a bucket of feed to lure them to me. As I got closer to Lewisburg, I entered White Sulphur Springs, West Virginia, and met with Joyce at a gas station. The proprietor told us about Greenbrier, which was a resort just further down the road, which is where many of the United States presidents went to retreat. So after almost 3 weeks of traveling in West Virginia, we finally came out of the valley at Lewisburg, where my cellular connection was restored and a message from Jim was waiting. I didn't bother listening to the message. I called him instead. He quickly answered and asked where was I? I said, I'm in Lewisburg. And he said, he was in Charleston, not far away. Yes, indeed. He had been given permission to come and get Blaze, the horse which I had come to enjoy, the horse that was equally pleasurable to ride as Sankofa, the horse that had finally connected to the journey and to what I wanted him to do. Yes, that horse. Jim had plotted my route and timed it perfectly and had driven 1,300 miles to pick up Blaze, and I gave him away to Jim. Blaze had matched Sankofa's spirit, his energy, and his ability to cover an equal number of miles each day. I don't need to tell you horse owners of how sad a day that was for me. Jim and I spent hours together before departing, and I began thinking about where I would camp for the night when something kind of eerie, tingling happened. It took me back to 1995 and the movie Deliverance with Burt Reynolds, and Joyce didn't want any part of it. I'm going to leave it there. But boy, do I have a story to tell in the next episode as we continue our trek through West Virginia. So stay tuned. Pay close attention. Check out the movie Deliverance. Subscribe to my YouTube channel. And as always, in the spirit of that old cowboy Roy, happy trails to you. Until we meet again.